Hello everyone and welcome to a video that's 11 months in the making. Starting in February, I read all of the core novels, these 11 books in the Ender's Game saga, one per month, so that I can make this video for you. Ender's Game remains one of my top 2 works in the science fiction genre, and a lot of these books are worthy companions. But there are a lot of terms here that are a little confusing. The Ender Quartet, the Ender Quintet, the Ender Shadow series, how do they mix together? Well, you've come to the right place because I'm going to give you, in addition to some reading orders, I'm going to define those terms, and then at the very end of this video, give my ultimate reading order. So without further ado, let's talk about the Ender's Game universe. Okay, the first order we're going to look at together is publication order, which, as my friend Scott the Bald Booktuber always recommends. As I show you the publication order, I'll also show you how these books fit together. The first book, of course, was Ender's Game, published in 1985. The one thing all 3 of these reading orders have in common is this starting point. This is the only starting point. I actually saw another booktuber recommend starting with Ender's Shadow, which I think is one of the worst bits of reading advice I've ever seen on this platform. Do not start with Ender's Shadow. Ender's Shadow ruins 2 absolutely brilliant plot turns that happen in Ender's Game. After Ender's Game, you'll read Speaker for the Dead, released in 1986, then Xenocide, released in 1991, and Children of the Mind, released in 1996. These 4 books became known as the Ender Quartet. Speaker for the Dead, Xenocide, and Children of the Mind in particular read as its own sequel trilogy to Ender's Game. Next you'll read Ender's Shadow, published in 1999, followed by Shadow the Hedgeman, published in 2001, Shadow Puppets, published in 2002, and Shadow the Giant, published in 2005. Those 4 books are the core of the Ender's Shadow series. Next up is Ender in Exile, published in 2008. Now, Ender in Exile was published as the direct sequel to Ender's Game and was advertised as the new Book 2 of the Ender Quintet, but I'm here to tell you that that is 100% incorrect. The grand finale of Ender in Exile concludes with a dangling plot thread left over from Shadow the Giant. So if you read this immediately after Ender's Game, you have no context to this plot thread and these characters and will not have the correct impact. In many ways, Ender in Exile, although following Ender as the main protagonist, belongs more to the Ender's Shadow series than the original quartet. That's why I generally say that the Ender Quintet does not exist, except for the publisher who wants to sell more copies of Ender in Exile. So we'll put Ender in Exile down at the bottom as it is an outlier that partially belongs to both series. Next up will be Shadows in Flight, published in 2012, which is technically part of the Shadow series. However, only one character from the Ender Shadow series appears in this very slight book, so I'm going to include it at the bottom here with Ender in Exile. The final book of these 11 core novels is The Last Shadow, published in 2021, and touted to be the true conclusion of both the Ender Quartet and the Ender Shadow series. And this is mostly true. It takes a plot thread from the Ender's Quartet that Card had not resolved, and includes some aspects of Shadows in Flight to bring this book together. So in many ways it is the ultimate conclusion to the Ender saga, bringing together both series. But I will also move this to the bottom as it is also a sequel of sorts to Shadow and Sinflight. Okay, order number 2 would be in-world chronological order, which is the order that I read them this year. For this order, of course, we start with Ender's Game and then go immediately to Ender's Shadow. This is the greatest strength of this order in my opinion, because Ender's Shadow is a companion novel that revisits many of the same storylines as Ender's Game. Reading them back to back provides more impact. After Ender's Shadow, we'll read the rest of the Shadow series, Shadow the Hedgeman, Shadow Puppets, and Shadow the Giant, finishing out the core Shadow series novels. Next we'll read Ender in Exile and Shadows in Flight, both outliers, but next in the chronology. We'll then read the rest of the Ender Quartet, Speaker for the Dead, Xenocide, and Children of the Mind, and then conclude with The Last Shadow. Another good byproduct of this order is that the main characters in The Last Shadow are the same as those in the Ender Quartet, so you would not have 6 novels between Children of the Mind and The Last Shadow muddying your memory of these characters. So that's chronological in-world order. Now on to my ultimate reading order. This is the order that if or when I decide to revisit these books that I will personally read them. I will of course start with Ender's Game. Then I will read Ender's Shadow. After that, Shadow the Hedgeman, followed by Shadow Puppets, followed by Shadow the Giant. And then I will stop. I will stop there for 3 reasons. Number 1, Shadow the Giant has a truly beautiful ending, and in many ways is the true conclusion of the Shadow series. And it also brings Ender's story into the fold at the very end, and proves a beautiful and cathartic ending to the series. Number 2, none of the books I put in the outlier row, in my opinion, are very strong. Shadows in Flight and The Last Shadow in particular are very skippable. And 3, although I did enjoy Speaker for the Dead, I cannot in good conscience recommend that anyone read Xenocide or Children of the Mind. I absolutely hated where Orson Scott Card took the series, so I can't recommend these books. But these 5 books are great. I did have a few issues with Shadow Puppets, but overall Ender's Game and the 4 core books of the Ender's Shadow series I can highly recommend. Well, that's my reading advice for all of these Ender Game books. I hope that this was useful for you. Let me know your experience with these books, whether this was a helpful video for you or not, whether you agree or disagree with my assessments as well. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. As always, you can find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'd love to interact with you there. Thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.